Hey, what's up?
Nothing.
Hey, you know Pac-Man?
I know of him.
Well, Pac-Man was originally called Puck-Man. They changed it because... not because Pac-Man looks like a hockey puck. Paku means flap your mouth. And that they were worried people would scratch out the P, turn it into an F, like...
Yeah, that's amazing.
Am I dreaming? I'll leave you alone forever now.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we're talking about Scott Pilgrim vs. the World from 2010.
Yes.
And we have a new 8-episode anime series out on Netflix.
All the same cast.
This Friday, so it'll be out by the time this episode drops, yeah. Pause the podcast. I'm going to say yes, pause the podcast, because we're going to spoil the ending.
Right.
Because I think there is a question about does hero get girl in this, or which girl?
I think you're right,
And I actually had kind of forgotten, despite multiple exposures to the comic and the movie, how each one ended.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say...
I would agree,
pause.
actually, because I think this movie's awesome, and you should go watch it.
Yeah, and even if you're only interested in one or the other, they both have the same ending, so we're going to ruin it either way. So
correct.
Probably check them out if you have any interest. Okay, so...
Welcome back.
Yeah. The comic ran from 2004 to 2010.
Yes.
By Bryan Lee O'Malley, was published by Oni Press, publishers of Suicide Extraction, so we're now in the Oni cinematic universe. It came out in 6 volumes. They were each manga size in black and white. Only volume 4 had a few color pages in the opening, which is a manga thing, very much to have a few color pages at the start of the volume, so it was very much trying to mimic that.
Yes.
There is a color version out as well, which to me it undoes the attempt to make it look like manga, but maybe it's a bit more video game-like to have it in those very poppy colors, so it's your choice.
It depends what you think the most important influence on the style is.
Exactly. I would say it's the manga influence, especially with the formatting of the volumes, but maybe there's even like an omnibus or something now. I'm not sure. So O'Malley had done one. He was mostly a letterer, I think, at Oni, and then he had done a single volume comic. I can't remember what that's called. Then he did this, and then he did another single volume comic after this. So this is kind of really a big, massive thing.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle there. I have to say, it's 1,200 pages. It's a pretty massive achievement for a young cartoonist to attempt right out of the gate. Pretty amazing in that regard. From what... I haven't read those two on the other ends or anything that's come since, but I did review this show on Deconstructing Comics 12, 13 years ago. And at that time, Tim, the co-host, had read those other two, and his thing was there's very clear messages and themes in those. There's a specific point. And I'm not sure if we're going to get... That'll be a question with Scott Pilgrim. Are we just here to have a good time, or is there a kind of message going on here?
That's a good question.
Is there some underlying thing, important thing happening? I'm not sure, but we will talk about that. I will add there's a bit of a shift in the art style. Anytime anybody decides to draw 1,200 pages of something, they get good. Yep. And he gets really good by volume 6. You read volume 6 and go back to number 1, you're like, this looks really weird. And I remember, even this week, I read the 6, watched the movie, and in the movie you get certain flashback scenes are done in comic booky style. Yeah. And it's like, this doesn't look quite right. Like, it doesn't look like a style. And then I went back, and actually it does look like volume 1. It does look like how, when he couldn't draw quite as well as he could by volume 6, it does look like that. But yeah, 6 volumes, I mean, it's a tour de force, and he did develop a consistent style by the end of it. So what else can we say about it before we start? It's let's use the word millennial right out of the gate.
Yeah.
He's about, I think he was born in 79,
okay.
So he's about 5 years younger than me. I read volume 1 around the time it came out, because there was a lot of buzz about this when it came out. So I bought it. And then I didn't buy any more because they were expensive. It was like $20 a pop. And I just go into the comic shop. I didn't have $100 to spend on Scott Pilgrim. The movie came out. I saw the movie. Then I walked into a shop and I found a set at a discount price. So I bought the whole set and I read the whole thing. Then I read the whole thing again to review for Deconstructing Comics.
That was 10 years ago or 13 years ago?
12, 13 years ago.
Not long after the film came out then.
Yeah, it would have been a couple of years after the movie came out, I think. No, you're right, 2010. Yeah,
That was
what
13
year?
years ago.
Okay, so maybe it was more like 8 years ago. Anyway.
This is the kind of detail that we really
Yeah, so
care
anyway,
about.
I'm reading it again this week. All this stuff is going to be relevant. I want to say that at the time, my feeling when I reviewed it 8 years ago on Deconstructing Comics was that I was not the target audience.
Right.
I felt like this was shooting at younger people. And I think it's rapid fire dialogue, snappy, sarcastic, non-stop snappy, sarcastic dialogue. Every panel has something funny happening in it. There's always a joke. And I remember reading the first volume, I was like, this is incredible. And then there's kind of a twist at the end of the first volume when the first evil ex-boyfriend attacks. You're like, holy cow, what is going on here? This is wild. And then you read 6 volumes of it, and I was a bit old man tired. Like, I'm kind of getting tired of all the snappy dialogue and the quirky, clever, all the cleverness and all that kind of stuff. And it was 6 volumes. I started to feel it was very long.
I am inclined to agree. I hadn't read it before.
Yeah.
I read the 6 volumes just this week.
Okay.
By volume 6, I was getting tired of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tired of the ADD styling.
Yes. Yeah, and at first it's a very multimedia thing. Like when the band plays a song, you get actual like music and lyrics, and it actually works better than V for Vendetta, which we talked about a few weeks ago. Like the music in here, it just suddenly it's there and it's great. And then you turn the page and you move on to the next thing, and there's a moment where you get a layout of Scott's apartment where he lives with Wallace?
Yeah, Wallace.
And you get these labels of who owns everything, and it's all owned by Wallace. But it's really like, he's just throwing all these different ways of communicating this information to you, and it's never the same twice.
It's always moving on to the next shiny thing.
Yes.
It's quite metatextual.
Yes,
in that it doesn't have it's not drawing on a common pool of ideas or imagery.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
The kitchen sink. Everything in the kitchen sink's being thrown in this comic. And it's relentless, as you say.
Yes. And one volume of it is really great.
Right.
The other thing about it, though...
Or one movie.
Or one movie. Yeah.
I would agree, though, that perhaps we're not really the target audience possibly for this book. I think I'm an honorary millennial, being born in 1981, which means that I turned 18 in 1999, which is just on the cusp of the millennium.
Right.
But I've never really sought this book out, whereas I'm a big fan of the film.
Yeah.
And this is the first time I read it, as I said, and it does feel a bit pubescent at times.
I think part of it is Scott Pilgrim himself, who is immature. I don't think he's an unlikable protagonist, but he's frustrating in his... I guess the book is about him trying to mature to the next... to grow up. He's 23.
Yeah.
It opens, he's dating this 17-year-old high school girl. Chinese Catholic school girl with the uniform and everything, as we're told, whose name is Knives Chow. And her name is never explained, by the way. Everybody has a name that is a noun or verb or adjective. Every single person. Pilgrim, Stephen Stills, Envy Adams.
Stephen Stills.
I don't think there's Flowers, Ramona Flowers.
Ramona Flowers. Young Neil. Is there anyone who has a name? Even Knives, and Knives in his name isn't explained. Anyway. What about Wallace? What's his surname?
Wallace Wells? At a stretch?
Yeah, well, same as Stills.
Anyway, they're all snappy Stanley kind of names.
Alliterative names, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them are. Or rhyming in some way. So anyway, it's about him trying to grow up. And my feeling was maybe Scott is learning lessons here that I didn't need when I was 30 years old. I'd already gotten past that stage, maybe. Yeah. So it was a bit tiresome to watch a young person have to go through this process. Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in my notes, but I've seen this comic described as Twilight for boys.
Maybe accurate.
Yeah, and I even ripped some quotes.
Okay.
Off the internet. It's Twilight for boys.
Yep.
It's male adolescent sexual angst as, quote, epic of epic epicness.
I don't agree that it's sexual angst, because actually one thing I do like about it is Scott doesn't have trouble getting girls. Girls think he's cute. Like, they find him attractive, and they're coming on to him semi-regularly.
Perhaps this quote then, which avoids the word sexual. In many ways, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is the equivalent of the Twilight Saga for boys. It is deeply rooted in pubescent romantic fantasy, albeit this time from the male's point of view.
Yes.
It is, and this is a bit harsh, it is foolish and shallow about the ways of relationships, pandering to the basest instincts of the target audience. A little harsh.
I don't know if I fully agree with that.
But I think where it resonates for me is that to take what is essentially it says pubescent or adolescent kind of sensibility about romantic relationships or about growing up, and inserting it in a fantastical adventure.
Yes.
And part of the appeal is the fantastical adventure, but at the core you have these kind of deeply juvenile, really, attitudes towards love, romance,
you can
partnership, and adulthood.
See, I think the thing is you can throw those things out and just go for the fantasy stuff and the fight stuff and all that kind of stuff. So you can get something out of it either way, even if you say that stuff is nonsense and leave it aside and ignore it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll go through it a little bit. So it starts that he's dating this girl. This is all set in Toronto. He has a dream about another girl. He has a dream that he's all alone in a desert and this girl rollerblades past him.
Yeah.
Courier. So the next day, this girl, Knives, he has never even held hands with her. He met her on the bus. They decided they're dating. He's 23, she's 17, and they've definitely never kissed. They haven't even held hands at this stage.
No, it makes it a little more palatable than perhaps maybe Seymour and Enid's relationship in Ghost World.
Yeah, anyway.
The fact that he does never act in a predatory fashion towards her.
Yeah, right.
Unless the whole fact of him dating her is predatory. Debatable. Yes. Anyway, go on.
So they end up going to a public library together. This is Knives and Scott. Scott's in a band, by the way, called Sex Bomb, and Knives comes over to watch one of the rehearsals. She thinks they're the greatest thing because she's just like a wide-eyed 17-year-old, and she thinks it's just totally awesome. They end up going on a date, quote-unquote date, to the library, or they're just hanging out at the library. It's a 3-page scene. It's quite amazing how short the scenes are in the comic. It's very fast-paced. Anyway, he sees a courier come make a delivery to the library, and it's the girl from his dream.
Yeah.
So, he's stunned by this. Then he ends up going to a party at this girl Julie's house, who's on again, off again with the guitar player in the band, Stephen Stills.
Okay. Do you know who Stephen Stills is? He was in...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He's not Canadian, right? But he was in Buffalo Springfield.
Yes.
With Neil Young.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I must admit, I was an embarrassingly long way into this comic before it clicked that young Neil was Neil Young.
Neil Young, yeah. And young Neil he's called Young Neil because he's 20 years old, so he's the youngest of that group. But he's not in the band, he just watches.
He's like a hanger-on.
He just hangs out. I think he might be living with Steven or... Anyway.
Yes.
So they go to this party with Julie and... at Julie's house, and Scott finds out from this guy Como, who is actually an actual Toronto cartoonist, underground avant-garde cartoonist.
Really?
Michael Como.
He knows everyone.
Who knows everyone. He finds out that he says, do you know this girl that's got hair like this? And he points down, and Michael's like, oh, that's Ramona Flowers, and he meets her at this party, and he tries to kind of tries a line on her. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
just thinking about the film.
Yeah.
But sorry, go on, yeah.
So he's trying to figure out how to meet this girl again.
He's obsessed with her.
Yes, because she was in his dream, and then afterwards he saw her in real life. So he figures out that she's a courier for Amazon. Somehow he gets this information from somebody, maybe from Julie.
I think he gets it from Julie.
Okay.
He certainly gets it from her in the film.
Yes.
And he's dreaming about her because she's taking a subspace...
Well, this is what we find out next. So first he gets to get her... So he's like, okay, I'll place an order with Amazon, which is my favorite joke. I've read it 3 times in the comic, 3 times in the movie, where he asks Wallace, what's the website for Amazon.ca? And in the comic, it's really genius because there's the pacing is so good. It's amazing how good the cartooning is in this issue where, I mean, for such a young cartoonist, where there's a pause and then he's like Amazon.ca and then he puts it in. By the way, another thing in this comic is almost every sentence, I should say almost every, ends in a question mark. So that, which I think is maybe a millennial thing. But anyway, so he orders some CDs and he immediately starts waiting for them. And it's like, it's the weekend, they're not going to show up. This is the early days. He doesn't have a cell phone. He doesn't even know what email is because he gets an email and it's from some guy named Matthew Patel. And he says he wants to fight. And he's like, and then Scott's like, this is boring, and then he deletes it. Okay, so finally when she does deliver the package on Monday, then he says, I dreamed about you. She says, oh, I've been using your head as a subspace highway, which is a thing they don't have in Canada. She's from the States. But now we've got this, it's not, so first we're like, how is it possible that he dreamed about her? Now we're in some kind of world where...
Is this the first departure from... I mean, up to that point, I suppose the breaks from reality have all been non-diegetic. And is this the first one, with the labels for the stuff, etc., etc.? We could, I suppose, dismiss it as effect, cartooning effect. But now, this is literally... She takes a shortcut through a wormhole that passes through Scott's brain.
Yes.
All the time.
And I have to say... Sort of, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost implied that the reason he's obsessed with her is because she's been leaving footprints in his brain.
Yes,
and somehow... From taking that shortcut.
Somehow in the comic, it's a believable... You believe it immediately. Oh, that's what it is. It's a subspace, it's some science fictional thing. Whereas in the movie, when she says it, you're like, is she just being... Is this a sarcastic joke? Kind of. Like, you're not sure how to take it.
I like the way it's played in the film, but because I like that it's just thrown away. It's a throwaway. Whereas, as you say, it's a little more believable in the comic. And in the first volume, it is believable. But I feel like by volume 6, it's a real house of cards. I've been in this world for 6 volumes, and it hasn't collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. So things are happening all the time.
Yeah.
Buses are getting cut in half by swords. People are warping through one another's brains.
Yeah.
People fly. The moon is punched twice and causes tidal events on Earth.
Yeah.
By the end of the book, I'm getting checked out because I'm starting to think, what are the consequences of all this stuff?
There's a whole...
Why does the world look so much like our world, but there's so much wacky shit going on all the time? I think it's sustainable for a shorter story, but over time, I'm starting to pick it apart.
Yeah, well, I think he was struggling to build this house of cards as well in some ways because this is jumping way ahead, but there's this whole thing called the glow.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time... Know what that is. Well, I don't know what it is, quite what it is either, even third time reading through it, but there's a scene where... very early on where Scott says something to Ramona and she's kind of avoiding answering him, and we get these comic book emanata coming out of her head, which are just black lines, and you're just thinking that's just comic book language. She's just surprised or shocked about something. He has a surprised look on his face. You're not really sure why. It's like, okay, whatever, you go on. Then later on, people start talking about it, and they're like, oh, this is an actual thing that they can see. So does that mean they can see all the writing and all the other stuff that's the other comic booky stuff?
It starts to collapse under its own weight.
Weird, and then there's a whole plot lines about this glow.
It's an important part in the last 2 volumes.
He headbutts the final villain and transfers the glow to him somehow. And they're supposed to be...
It's supposed to help undermine him in the final battle.
Yeah, and
it weakens him, but I don't even know what the damn thing is.
Exactly, yeah. So,
and it's playing an important role in probably, certainly volume 6 and maybe even volume 5.
Yeah.
And because he's constantly moving on to the next thing, it's just... I'm starting to lose track. It's starting to really frustrate me.
Right.
It's starting to really grate, frankly. Another thing, we can't summarise the plot of the whole 6 volumes. But another thing is, what everyone knows about the film, I suppose, I mean, presumably everyone's gone and watched it, is that Scott fights 7 evil exes.
Yeah.
He has 7 epic battles.
Yes.
With 7 opponents.
Well, so we do need to rewind and explain this. So the email he got from this guy, Matthew Patel, he gets attacked at the end of the volume. I think they're at a gig, they're playing a gig with the band, and suddenly this guy attacks, and he says, and he actually said, there's another point where he gets a snail mail letter from him, which he also ignores. Scott ignores that as well.
He does.
And so this guy, Matthew Patel attacks, he says, I'm one of her ex-boyfriends, you have to defeat all 7 of us. Now
Did you read my email on the subject?
Yeah. Now, I think 7 is probably a bit too many. I think 3, maybe 5 would have been enough. But I actually think he's going for Dragon Ball here. I think he was trying to go for the 7 Dragon Balls.
It's very...
Or maybe there's something in... Because there's a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog stuff. Maybe there's something in Sonic that's 7
It's a very
levels
manga-esque or anime-esque concept, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think we've actually discussed this in previous episodes, but the mini-boss squad, each of which has a different power, like Mega Man or something, then you have to beat each one before you get to the final boss, I feel like is a real... it's something that I associate heavily with like manga and anime.
Yeah.
Like Ninja Scroll.
Yeah.
Or something like that, where each of the baddies has a different power, and I think he's very much going for that because they all do have different powers.
Yeah. Oh well, there's besides the format of the thing, there's manga stuff all over here. So there's like the mimetic sound effects, like where when he peeks around the corner, you'll get a sound effect peek or something like that. There's all that kind of stuff in there. There's a scene where at one stage he gets a job as a dishwasher, and he's standing in front of the place where he's going to work. This is in Volume 4, and the camera zooms into his face. So it's a cinematic effect, and then we get a zoom out from the back of his head. That's a total Osamu Tezuka move.
Right.
To zoom in and out like that and spend a whole, 6 panels or whole page to create this cinematic effect. When Envy Adams shows up, one of his ex-girlfriend, the one that broke his heart a year earlier, his main ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
She is drawn in exactly a Junko Mizuno style. Like, he's copied that exactly. So there's sometimes big fingerprints on here. But also there's stuff like, there's a lot of talk about the X-Men Follow the Mutant storyline and stuff like that.
Yep.
It's like you said,
It's a real mixed bag.
Everything's in there.
Yeah.
The manga stuff is real. There's manga speed lines are in there, so that's definitely a major thing, and I think that's why we had 7. Maybe it's
as you said, it's manga-sized book.
Yeah, but
brightly coloured covers.
Yeah.
It looks very with the kind of pop font on the front. It all looks. I mean, you confuse it for a manga if you were in a bookstore.
Yeah, but I think 7 is maybe too many. I think there may be kind of a bit too similar. It's hard to remember who...
They are similar in that. And also, they don't spend... Here's one of my complaints about the comic. They don't stick around long enough.
Yeah.
A lot of this, of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and this is why I brought up the film, in the international releases of this film, most of the time the film's title has to do with the 7 X's.
Right.
Not in the English title, where it's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but in Japan, for example, I think it's called the 7 Evil X Corps. Which feels like a really Japanese name. So the focus is his battles with the X's.
Yeah.
As a kind of like as an action concept. In the comic, he spends very little time fighting the X's, actually.
Yeah, in fact, the Yatanagi twins, was that their name? But they...
Katsunagi twins?
Katayanagis.
Katayanagi.
So they build this robot that's got to fight, but it's basically happening in the background. There's other conversations
they're
happening.
just talking to Ramona out on a deck. Meanwhile, we don't even see the fight that Scott's having with the various robots. He's always beating the robots that they build off panel, and I'm just thinking, what is this?
But I think at this stage, even O'Malley knows that's we've already fought a bunch of X's. Why do we need to see another fight with the X's? Is not the important thing. If you ever watch Dragon Ball Z, it's exhausting. Like just focusing on the fights. Why not have them be in the background and have a conversation? That's actually a kind of good contrast or a nice different approach. Is to let's not focus on the fight, but I do think that means that the Katayanagis are not that distinct as... Except the fact that they're twins and the fact that they have a robot to fight in
the
their
film.
place.
They have these distinct characteristics and distinct aesthetic.
Yes, absolutely.
And distinct powers.
I think that's true of all the evil X's in the movie are very different from each other.
Fantastic.
Maybe it's because they're crammed into 2 hours and you have to look at them really fast as opposed to reading, as opposed to them coming in 200 pages later and you're like, this seems a bit like...
I feel like you could blink and miss them in the comic. And we spend, on the other hand, page after page after page about Scott getting a job.
Yeah.
And sucking at his job.
Yeah, and then Stephen wants the band to record. There's a lot of thing about the band. They stop practicing and gigging and so start trying to record an album. And there's a whole lot of stuff about there's a whole bunch of stuff about moving.
Moving out of their house because because they visit their landlord.
Yeah. Well, okay, because it's not. But these things are not. This is 1,200 pages. This is like a Russian novel. You can put all this stuff in there. I mean, there's no. You wouldn't leave it out.
I think
you could leave it out for a shorter. Yes, you could leave it out for a shorter book, but I'm going to say. If you're reading one of these 1 year after the previous one or something, those gags, there's funny gags in every volume.
It is funny. I agree.
I mean, the visit to the landlord stuff, that stuff is all funny if you haven't read 600 pages in the last hour already, if you know what I mean.
Okay, I'm willing to concede that point, but I do feel like it drags on too long, and I just don't care enough about, as you said, like Scott, he's not particularly likable, but he's not particularly hateable either. I'm just not that interested in his 1,200 page struggle to grow up.
Yeah.
I'm a little more interested in him beating up the X's, frankly.
Yeah. So his ex-girlfriend was this girl, Envy Adams.
Oh yeah, we get a whole volume about Envy Adams.
Yeah.
And there are flashbacks. Okay, now, it eventually... Look, if I were reading the book, a physical book, because I read it on my computer, if I read the physical book, it might have been more obvious when the flashbacks were occurring because they're on black pages.
That's a manga. That's a manga thing.
Okay.
Always go to black for a flashback.
Right.
Yeah.
But it took me quite. I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
I don't know what was going on, like,
Right.
because I didn't associate the black pages with the flashback,
Right.
or I just didn't spot it.
Even I had to figure that out myself as a translator.
Brilliant. Okay,
20
that
years
makes me
ago.
feel better.
Yeah.
And also, like, the characters, some of the characters look similar,
Yes.
and I couldn't keep track
Yes.
of who was who.
Definitely by volume 5 and 6, like certain characters like Julie and some of the background characters, his sister, I was like, which one's this one? Was having a little bit of trouble with that. I will say, okay, so I was about to talk about Envy. So she she was not famous before, but she has become famous in this band called the Clash of Demon Head. They're coming to town. They ask Sex Babam to open for them, and it's almost like a mind game by Envy to ask them to do this, because she's not sure where she's going with Scott, but she's in a relationship with Todd, their bass player. Anyway, we get a whole subplot where Todd is cheating on her with the drummer.
Who has a bionic arm?
Yes.
Or a cyborg arm, I suppose.
So ends up being another ex that has to be beaten. Knives also gets in a fight with Ramona in Volume 2. She attacks. Even though they break up, Knives ends up dating young Neil
To make Scott jealous.
It's more...
Everyone has baggage. This is all about
This
is really what the comic's about. We can move on to that now. This comic is about relationships are hard, man. So this comic is about relationships. And it spends a lot of time on everyone's different relationships.
Yes.
Comparatively little time, as a point I've laboured over the last 10 minutes, on fighting evil ex-boyfriends, and quite a lot of time on who's dating whom, who remembers what about whom, who still cares about whom. It's fucking exhausting.
But wait a second.
It's also... No, alright, go on.
Okay, so let's say that the 7 X's represent having to get over your partner's emotional connection to their exes.
Yes. Yeah,
What does it mean if the solution is to fist fight them until they turn into coins? Because the baggage thing might be true in the real world, but that's not how you would deal with that in the real world. So that's why I'm not really sure.
Does this book have
a message, or are we just here to have a good time, and is it just a structure to get these fights and jokes in there?
I think you can have both, but I don't think the comic pulls it off.
Well, I'm not sure there is a message, because I don't see what the solution is to.
I think they're
getting over your girlfriend's exes.
Definitely is a message. Well, I don't know if there's a lesson.
Okay.
But I think there's a message.
Okay.
And as I said, the message is relationships are difficult. Obsession over the past is dangerous. Refusal to let go of the past is dangerous, as is misremembering.
Yes.
That's a big part. That people are literally editing one another's memories.
Yes.
In this comic. And it's implied that... what I took away from it, I suppose, is that growing up means reconciling your inner and outer worlds. What does that have to do with punching ex-boyfriends? Nothing, really. Which is why I suppose the book is about so much other stuff all the rest of the time. But the parts that I enjoyed are the parts with the punching of the ex-boyfriends. But I think they're definitely, by the end of the book, people, like... There's this thing with Nega Scott.
Yep.
Who is Scott's shadow.
Yep. Introduced in Volume 4.
Yep. Classic trope, the shadow of the self that's stalking you. It's the part of yourself that you don't want to face. You need to vanquish it, but in vanquish it, take it back into oneself. That is happening. It's not particularly laboured, but it's present. Even Gideon wants to freeze all his exes until they want to get back with him.
Yes, he's the last boyfriend, the 7th.
Yeah, the 7th boyfriend. He's sort of the villain. He has some sort of need to control everything, right? He has to control his past. He has to control the present. He literally freezes girls that dumped him and and keeps them prisoner until they're willing to be with him again. And so that to me seems to be the meaning of the book.
Okay.
But I can see it there, but it doesn't really resonate with me. The book's too long. It's too random. It jumps around too much. It has attention deficit disorder, as I've said. It's a real mixed bag of influences and so on.
But I think that's what works for it when you're not binging it.
Right. I'm willing... Again, I'm never
I want to say there's stuff in here that gets me every time. And, okay, maybe some of this stuff is very, very Toronto-specific. Like the fight in Honest Ed's.
Yeah.
He goes into Honest Ed's with Todd. Now,
yeah.
I'm like...
You have to be Canadian to get this.
You have to have been in Honest Ed's. Not even Canadian, you have to go to Toronto.
Well, it doesn't exist anymore, Kumar.
It doesn't exist anymore. So there used to be, next door, the Beguiling, the greatest comic shop on earth, used to be in a house next door. So you would have to go to Honest Ed's. If you're interested in comics, if you live in Toronto, you've heard about this place.
Right.
It's just like, you go in, it's just like a crazy random pile of discount crap. Although my mustache scissors came from Honest Ed's many years ago because I flew to Toronto. I had my scissors in my carry-on bag and they got taken by airport security, so I need to buy new mustache scissors. I made the mistake of going in Honest Ed's and I was like, oh my god, what is this place? That was the one and only time I've ever been in there.
In the comic, it's like an eldritch location, and
it's what beats Todd. Like, it overwhelms his mind.
Yeah. Family.
So yeah, that still got me every time, like the Amazon CA thing. I love and there's stuff I didn't like, that X-Men. All the X-Men stuff, I remember the first time I read it, I was like, what is he talking about? And then it was like the second read, I was like, oh my god, this is Fall of the Mutants. Like, it finally clicked. But I love all the manga stuff like that. There's one volume where it's at the back, he's got the page where it says stop, this is the back of the book, which you get in a lot of...
But it is the back of the book.
It is the back of the book, yes.
Yeah, I think it's really funny. I took pictures of some panels, I won't go into it now, but there are some hilarious panels. One that leaps to mind is we get a shot of the computer screen in the video rental store. He goes in there, I think he's looking for Ramona. He's trying to figure out if she ever comes in there. And is it Kim that works in there? I think it's Kim that works in the...
Yes, his sister works at the coffee shop with Julie.
Yeah, and I think Kim works in the video rental store. And she just basically tells him, what are you even doing here? We can't rent movies to you. And she turns the screen around, and the screen says something like, Scott Pilgrim rented The Land Before Time 4, kept it for 36 weeks, claimed a mouse hid it somewhere in his apartment. Do not rent to him, he is scum.
Yep.
There's lots of little things like that.
Todd, his veganism thing, there's a line which is prophetic where he says, they're like, where'd you get your powers? He says, veganism. If you knew the science, you would understand. I was like, oh my god, that's so, like, this is pre-Facebook, but I was like, oh my god, that is amazing. There is... Oh yeah, another very manga thing is changing the names of products. So like the video game Time Crisis is called Time Critics. Like, very subtle things. It's right out of the manga school. What else did I have here? Oh, there's a chapter called About to Explode, EXPLOD, which was the Akira poster.
Akira, yeah.
Yeah. And
Neo
that's in the movie as well. They put that on screen before the fight with Todd.
Really good. So yeah, a lot of... And yeah, I've got... What do I like? It's funny. It really is funny.
Yes. I will say, also another thing about it being too long is, in Volume 1, you think it's going to be hero gets girl story, and he gets the girl at the end of Volume 1. He's with Ramona Flowers at the end. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, well, now what? So now we've got to have all sort of stuff about them moving out. There's a whole thing where, later on, Ramona finds out that he cheated on her with knives and vice versa, but actually... Okay, I don't want to sound like a jerk about this, but they held hands. So, I don't know what degree of cheating this is, but they've been going out for a while, and now they break up. It's not even really clear. It's like, he's like, hey, can I have the house key? Like, I forgot it. And she's like, just stay somewhere else. And then we learn later that she's kicked him out for, like, months.
Yeah.
Because...
He's, like, living on the street or something?
Because he held hands with knives before they were
just goes
dating.
down these rabbit holes. Really long, tortuous rabbit holes. And I feel like it's not helping. It's not interesting.
Knives' father, and there's a whole plot line about him attacking Scott, and we think, is he an evil ex? No, it's just Knives' father. Maybe didn't need to be in there.
No, exactly. There's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't need to be in here. And I don't have a problem with the message that you need to be realistic, to be a grown-up. Fine, you need to look at yourself unflinchingly and measure yourself against reality. whatever. But it really takes a long time to come to the point.
Yes.
And it just go...
And then the point is dropped on you, like the glow. It's just like, here's the explanation of it. Like, she kind of says...
can manipulate... I think he's... Is he editing memories with it?
I don't know. And she says, oh, I changed my hair because I don't want to feel like I'm settling down or something. But until she says that out loud, we don't really know what the changing her hair all the time. And there's one thing that reminded me is at the beginning of the back cover of Volume 2, this is the blurb on the back cover. It says, Scott has 2 girls on the go. When he's with Knives, he feels like he can erase his past and start over. When he's with Ramona Flowers, he's ready to accept all that, grow up, and move on. Yeah. But I'm like, I didn't get that from Volume 1. That's just what the back cover is telling me. I mean, I enjoyed Volume 1 very much, but that's not what I wasn't getting any sense of that level of theme at that stage in the book.
I think perhaps, as you said, it's not necessarily aimed at us. I think maybe...
Yes.
Because a lot of kids like this... Well, kids. Obviously, these kids would be in their 30s now. People that teenagers and young adults that were enjoying it when it came out. But I think there's a lot in there that seems deep, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
If you're a bit...
Okay.
Like, not... This is going to sound a little elitist, but if you're a bit credulous, there's a lot in there for you. There's a lot of...
Well, like the V for Vendetta movie. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like the V for Vendetta movie. There seems like something... You feel...
It seems like there's something deep there.
It seems like there's something there. Like, I think I've seen it described as deepity online. There's a lot of deepity in this book.
Yeah.
Just like the V for Vendetta movie. Excellent comparison. And speaking of movies, are you ready to talk about the film?
Yes, I think that kind of covers my notes about the comic.
I've spent the last half hour complaining about this film. About the comic, and I love the film.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it too.
I think it's brilliant.
I want to say, okay, so there's lots of interesting stuff here going on. Obviously, they can't do the manga stuff because it's a movie.
That's right.
They don't do it. They have a little bit of, I guess, anime stuff when they do the flashbacks in Bryan Lee O'Malley's style.
Yes.
But they've amped up the video game stuff, which the comic can't do because it's comics.
Yes.
And that's such a smart decision.
Such a smart decision.
So I want to say that the last volume came out in 2010 and the movie came out in 2010.
That's correct.
So
and it had
something
an impact
similar to, what was the Mark Millar, Kick-Ass?
Yep.
Rose that too, right?
It is similar. And I can talk, I did a little bit of reading about how this got made, which we can get into once we finish talking about it.
Directed by Edgar Wright, who also wrote Tintin and Ant-Man.
Yes.
And I believe he's has pretty hands-on with the cartoon, the anime of Scott Pilgrim that just came out. I think he directed it or is a producer.
Well, that's brilliant.
I think he's the one that recruited all the actors to come back.
That's great. So he's a UK director.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of nerd cred, I suppose. He did the Cornetto trilogy of films.
Yes.
So that's Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah.
Absolutely classic. Hot Fuzz, which I love.
Yeah.
Probably one of my top 10 films, Hot Fuzz. Brilliant. At World's End.
Yep.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's good. Paul is really good. Baby Driver's excellent.
Yeah, I haven't seen Baby Driver.
There's some similar stuff in this movie to Baby Driver moments, but Baby Driver really amps up. There's certain things where the actions of a character are in time with the music that you hear on screen.
Right.
Particularly when Lucas Lee, who's the actor boyfriend, gets off the bus and everything he does is in time with the music. That's all through Baby Driver.
Right. Fantastic.
Because what he did in that was he actually put earbuds in the actor's ears and played the music. They cleared all the rights for the music before they filmed in Baby Driver.
Yep.
And then they were like pulling the trigger of guns in time with the beat of the music they were hearing.
There's some similar stuff going on in this film. Yeah. We don't usually talk a lot about production, but he's very... How to describe it? He's very much having the actors... So he's not doing this stuff in editing, in post.
Yeah.
Right? He's very big on things happening as he's shooting. So when a special effect is occurring, in Scott Pilgrim, for example, he insisted on having some kind of visual representation of that special effect occurring so the actors could react to it.
Yeah.
In this case, flash bulbs were always going off on set. Whenever, when they're having sword fights and their swords are clashing, he's having the flash bulbs going off when their made-up swords are clashing against one another. Things like that. He seems to be very much having the actors react in real time to the things that he's planning to put in post.
Right. Okay, so first time I saw this when it came out, of course, because I read the comic and was Volume 1, which, as I said, I totally loved, and I was very keen to see this movie. So it kind of hit all the sweet spots. There's Toronto, there's video games, there's music, there's some Japan stuff in there. It really hit it. It's very respectful to the comic in the sense of, like, they use the fonts and everything. And
yes, it is.
O'Malley was a letterer, so he has a design sense about the lettering and the way things look in terms of that. So that all that stuff is on. There's a lot of on-screen text, a lot of gags straight out of the comic, a lot of dialogue. And anytime they changed dialogue, it was only to punch it up. One that I really loved was there's a scene where Wallace Wells says to Scott, "It's time to use the L word," and Scott says lesbian, and Wallace says no, love. In the comic, in the movie, it's time to use the L word. He says lesbians know the other L word. And he said lesbians.
It's so funny. And I don't want to talk too much more about the comic, but in the comic, this is coming shortly after Scott has seen Knives and Kim kissing. This serves no purpose, except maybe that he's hung up on Kim because they dated two of his exes, and now they're kissing, but really... And then when he says lesbians, he's thinking of that still. In the comic, what does this do? It makes the joke less funny.
I'm not sure. I think it's a good gag, either way, but I think it's punched up in the movie.
I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
Because it's such a non sequitur in the film.
It makes it so much funnier. You're right. You're right. Because there's no reason for him to be thinking the word is lesbian.
It's just hilarious.
Okay, interesting thing here is they play Dance Dance Revolution when he's out with Knives. Now, this is a really interesting moment because in the comic, in the end of Volume 1, Matthew Patel attacks and Scott fights him. And then somebody says a line of dialogue that says, doesn't he know that Scott is the best fighter in the province? And it's great. In the comic, it's fine. It's like, here's a funny add-on that's happened suddenly, a sudden non sequitur, which is quite good. Here we've got a bit of, he plays Dance Dance Revolution, so he kind of knows these moves. And there's also a great moment here where he asks, where it continues flashing, and he turns to Knives to put the quarter in the machine, which was a really good little subtle touch. But also we get the Nega Ninja in the video game.
A little bit of
so that's like right in the first 10 minutes of the movie. I can never beat
this guy, he says. I love this too, the Dance Dance Revolution scene. I like all the stuff about it. I really love this scene because it's not present in the comic, whereas quite a lot of this, especially Volume 1, makes it into the first half hour of the film. A lot of the same dialogue, a lot of the same scenes. The scene in the
library, which in the comic I was like, this is 3 pages, how's this going to be in the movie? You can't have a scene this short. That scene is in the movie.
Yeah, it is.
And it flows very smoothly. It's fine in there. And all the dialogue's the same.
But I love the Dance Dance Revolution because he's talking about Pac-Man with... It's in another bit of foreshadowing. He's talking about Pac-Man with Knives, and they're in great sync because they're playing Dance Dance Revolution together really well, chatting together happily, although there's that moment, because Scott is a bit of a user and he's immature, he gets his 17-year-old girlfriend to put the quarter in because he's broke and a cheapskate and a moocher, etc., etc. This is like a great little scene. I really love it because it plays out in so many ways in coming scenes throughout the film. This works so great as a movie because there are so many of the gags, as you said, are punched up with things that you can do in film that you couldn't do in the comic.
It's
fantastic when he takes Knives to his house and she says, "Can I go in and see it?" And he goes, "No." He calls it his super secret lair. "No, my super secret lair is one of those no girls allowed deals. How about you see the place where I grew up?" It's the other side of the street. They turn around and I think there's not a pan, it's a hard cut. But still, it's plainly the other side of the street. They haven't gone anywhere. He lives right opposite the house he grew up in. And I have to say the film's full of stuff like that.
Yeah, and they built the door into the basement like the same as in the comic.
Yeah.
I have to say, the comic, too, another amazing thing about it, like the Honest Ed scene, all the Toronto landmarks, O'Malley has a very simple style, not too many lines, very thick lines, but he really is able to... It feels like a Toronto house, like when you look at the architecture and stuff. It's really well rendered.
It's not... You won't be shocked to hear that this was filmed in Toronto.
No.
Entirely.
No. Although you only see the CN Tower in the last shot of the movie, maybe deliberately.
I'm sure it was.
Because often when they shoot movies in Toronto, it's not supposed to be Toronto, they often directors have to block the shots so that the tower's not visible in it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, lots of films are shot in Toronto.
Yeah.
Because of the tax breaks, but and the fact that it's cheaper. But yeah, well, this film got a tax break, as we'll get into later on. But Edgar Wright, who took this film extremely seriously, lived in Toronto for an entire year.
Yeah, right.
Before they started filming. That's how keen he was to come to grips with the sensibility of the town.
Right.
And from the sounds of things, it comes through.
Yeah, I think it really does, for sure. And there's lots of other little nods, but we'll get to them. There's no Honest Eds in the movie.
No, Honest Eds, unfortunately, has gone... But they did, they just exhumed that... They got rid of that little subplot.
Oh, yeah, lots of subplots are gone.
But they did... Apparently, some of the places featured in the comic have since disappeared, gone under, or gone out of business.
Yes, right.
And they rebuilt them.
Oh, right, okay.
So one of the bars, the bar where the Battle of the Bands is held,
yes,
which is described as like a pigsty or a pit, that had since been turned into, like a...
Probably apartments.
Yeah, apartments.
That's what Honest Ed's that location is now, is something like that, yeah.
So they rebuilt it.
Right. Right.
Edgar Wright's like, we should make this a museum. It's like, no one really wants a museum of... I mean, if the film had done really well, maybe it could have been a museum, but unfortunately...
So Gideon Graves here he's introduced early on as a record producer, but...
The G-Man.
They have to call him G-Man. There's some kind of dancing around it. Yeah. They have to kind of massage the script in a weird way to hide his name before the ending. It's
not a big deal. It serves a kind of narrative purpose because he's a big record producer that they're trying to impress.
Yes.
But it's always... It's really understated, I think. They occasionally... Steven says, we have to go to this gig. G-Man might be there.
Right.
Or, we have to play this gig with Envy because G-Man might be there. And then Gideon appears when we see Gideon for the first time, it's at their battle with the Katsunagi twins. And Scott says, G-Man is Gideon!
Yeah.
It's fine. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
I like how low-key it is.
Yeah, I think you can see the seams, I think is what I'm saying, but anyway, it's not that big a deal.
That's fine.
The first fight with Matthew Patel happens, plays it in the comic, he gets the email,
exactly like
the same gag where he says, this is boring, and deletes it.
And we have some great cuts back and forth. We see Scott's face looking anxious, we see him zooming in on the lines of the text, death, the word battle, a struggle to, this is, the word death, this is boring, and then he deletes it.
Yeah. So Patel shows up, he's actually, I love the way this actor moves.
Yeah.
It's got a really interesting...
He has a little Bollywood dance.
He has a little Bollywood dance, which is maybe slightly annoying, but I did like his control over his body and his dance style. That was really good. Then we get to Lucas Lee, who is played by Chris Evans.
This is pre-Captain America Chris Evans.
Yes.
So, but he's played...
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
10? Okay.
The first... when this film was in post-production, he then went on to do the first Avenger.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, I know, it's hard to imagine. This film has so many big comic book names in it.
Yes,
absolutely. And so many people that have gone on to scale the heights of nerd culture.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think that when this film came out, a lot of them were just starting out their careers.
Yeah, right.
Aubrey Plaza and Anna Kendrick.
Yes.
Which were like nobodies. This is like...
Hadn't Anna Kendrick been in the Twilight movies at this stage? Surely.
I don't know.
Surely.
But they weren't, they weren't the big names they are now.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the fight with Lucas, plays out differently from the comic. Much like the Bollywood dance is not in the comic, although I think he does summon up like some angels or something.
He does.
But here, Lucas Lee uses his stuntmen to attack Scott. Something I never noticed in the two previous viewings of this movie, but I noticed this time was the martial arts in this movie is pretty good.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they...
Cera did... He did a lot of training.
Well, he does beat the shit out of a bunch of guys in Barbie.
Yeah,
as well.
Well, apparently, this is a matter of public record. He had such fun learning martial arts and getting into shape for this movie, Scott Pilgrim, that he's kept it up ever since. And so that's why he does it in Barbie, because he still practices weekly.
Right.
In fact, believe it or not, he was nicknamed Push-Up King on set.
Okay. I believe it
because of how aggressively he got into shape.
And I was like, did they do this like I, Tonya, where they like CG'd the actor's face over like a figure skater? And then it was like, no, this looks like they really shot it with him swinging this sword around and doing these turns and twirls and stuff.
It's him. Yeah.
And I thought, wow, he must have
The
been in pretty good shape.
2010 didn't have I don't think the compositing technology was good enough to stick your face on someone moving like that. But it is him. I mean, it's a fact that it's him because he trained aggressively to be able to perform these stunts. Speaking of the stuntmen, I have a little piece of trivia.
Okay.
Those are Chris Evans' stuntmen. His real stuntmen.
Right, okay. Right. That's awesome.
Only some of which look like him, which is so funny. They're his real stuntmen. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I wrote jump through window because there's a scene where Knives shows up.
So funny.
And to escape.
He just left. And then he jumps through the window in the background.
In the background. Of a basement window. It's really great moment.
And grabs his coat as well. It's just perfectly filmed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of visual gags like this. All through this film, I was chuckling.
Yeah.
This is the third or fourth time I've seen it, and I'm still chuckling at all of these little gags that happen constantly.
Yeah. A next note I had, I'm just going through these notes bizarrely.
Because
I wanted to note that all the shirts were the same as from the comic. Mm-hmm. And watching it yesterday, I noticed at one stage he was wearing a CBC shirt, and I was like, oh, that's not from the comic. And then I flipped through the comic again, and it's in the comic.
Right.
It was one of the shirts that Scott wears, was the CBC logo shirt, which was weird. There's a shirt that's
CBC
not
being
the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Yep.
There's a shirt that wasn't in the comic, which is an Astro Boy t-shirt.
Right.
He's wearing at one stage.
I think there's also a Fantastic Four t-shirt, which I think he's wearing in his fight with Lucas Lee, which is an obvious gag.
Oh, right.
Because at that point, Chris Evans' most famous role probably was playing the Human Torch.
Okay. I did think the Astro Boy thing was a nod to the comic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we go through these battles. There's Lucas. Envy shows up, played by
Brie Larson.
Brie Larson.
Very young Brie Larson, 18 years old.
Right. Okay. Now, it was a very interesting thing. Then we get Roxy, which is the girlfriend.
Yeah.
Which is what Ramona describes as a phase. There's Todd. Played by Brandon Routh. Now, I want to talk about Brandon Routh for a second because he is
Superman.
He was Superman.
He's a Superman.
He was also in Dylan Dog, which we'll get to at one stage. He played the Atom on the Legends of Tomorrow TV series.
Right.
He played Superman again on the Flash TV series.
Yes. I have a whole list of these, by the way.
So he's been through all of them. Then we get the music battle with the Katayanagi twins. Now, reason I went through all these because these are all to me, they're very different from each other.
Yes.
Like Lucas with all of the stuntmen, Roxy who
she fights Ramona.
Yes, and then Ramona has
Scott
to
doesn't even. She has
to hold his arms.
Yeah,
like
because
from
Scott
behind.
won't hit a girl.
That's right.
She has to hold his arms and make him kind of like fight.
Yes, and Todd, we get the base battle, which is in the comic. But then the vegan police arrest him. As in the comic, the vegan police show up. By the way, one of them played by Thomas Jane,
who
is in The Punisher, and also the Crow City of Angels. Yep. So he'll be turning up again.
He absolutely will. If we get through both of them, he'll be an all-star.
The interesting thing to me was Lucas, Envy, Roxy, and Todd are all kind of chewing the scenery in a good way, which contrasts very much with like Kim, who's super low-key, sarcastic. Julie, played by Aubrey Plaza, who's always called the bitch in the comic, and she's just being Aubrey Plaza.
Yep.
So they're kind of like the opposite end.
Actually, she's a little more acerbic than the usual Aubrey Plaza, and less ditzy. Well, I don't know if ditzy's the right word. She's a lot more sweary and
yes, that's true.
And cantankerous almost.
Yes, that's true. She's more like Julie in the comic, I guess.
Right.
She's pretty accurate to that. But to me, it was interesting. There was kind of a balance going on where some actors, where Edgar Wright was letting them totally ham it up in a way that wasn't really out of keeping with because this movie, like the comic, this movie is dazzling and I don't want to use the word exhausting, but it's on all the time. It's always on, and to have these actors come in and be totally over the top is just part of
absolutely
everything. And it's often when not much else is going. Like the first time we get Envy on the phone, Brie Larson, she's so chewy in this conversation. She's it's a really amazing vocal performance.
And we only see a close-up of her, of the lower half of her face, actually.
Yeah, and I don't think there's like much visual dazzle happening at this point. So in that conversation,
it's quite the visuals are understated in that scene. In the background, there's always something going on.
Yes.
Visually in this film, there's always something.
Sometimes the thing going on is Brian Lee O'Malley emanata, like comic book beams or stuff that looks like he's drawn them that are like flying around or whatever.
onomatopoeias.
Yes, exactly. Yes, lots of those. Yeah.
Or even just a line, like a caption almost.
Yeah.
Like when Wallace comes home drunk, he says, "Guess who's drunk? I guess Wallace." He turns the light on, and there's a click, visual click.
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be that click.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
It's almost just like this scene needs a little something.
Right.
We're going to put the click
in. Right. Yeah.
I love one of my favourite running gags that's not visual kind of gags, that's not a computer effect, is when they're always getting up in bed.
Yeah.
You know how they always sit up?
Yep.
They always... Because Scott and Wallace sleep in the same bed because there's only one bed in their pit of an apartment. And anyone that ever comes over, because Wallace has a lot of boyfriends, whenever anyone comes over, they're all in the bed together all the time.
Yes.
And Scott will wake up from a dream. There are a lot of dream sequences, and you can't distinguish them from the actual sequences in the film, which I think is fine. You don't know it's a dream until Scott sits up.
Yes.
And then Wallace will always sit up straight after him and ask, "What's wrong?" And then...
Yeah.
Whoever Wallace
boyfriend, whoever he's brought home, will also.
And at one stage, there's 4 of them.
Yeah.
And they're all giving Scott advice.
Yeah.
It's fucking
the repeated visual gag I liked was when somebody would say, "Scott, your hair's getting shaggy," and it would cut back to Scott, and he'd have his hat on.
He'd have a hat on.
Magically, his hat is on.
He hasn't had time to put the hat on.
Yeah.
He's just wearing the hat.
Yeah.
It's full of stuff like that. I just love it.
The fight with Knives and Ramona has been moved to the end.
Yes.
Which I guess makes sense for a movie.
Yes, and there is another reason for that.
Okay.
Since we're already talking about the end of the film, I may as well bring it up now. In the original ending of this film, Scott was supposed to get together with Knives.
Okay, you know what? Okay, yeah. Because I've seen this movie, like I said, a couple times before, watched last night. At the rate, I was like, it doesn't seem like he should be with Ramona. It seems like he should be with Knives.
That's right. And it's because the whole film has been leading up to it.
Yes.
Knives' role is beefed up in the film from what it is in the comic.
Yes, and I would say that Ramona's less proactive in the movie than she is in the comic. It seems like she's abducted by Gideon at the end.
Yeah.
Instead of going to him by choice.
Yes, and she's a lot more passive. She doesn't throw Scott out. She's just sort of generally unpleasant.
Yeah, maybe.
Unpleasant. She's just, she's a bit much more understated. And Scott just seems obsessed with her unhealthily.
Right.
They seems less mutually destructive than Scott is being self-destructive by pursuing her constantly. And the exes are obviously a big part of that. Whereas Knives' role is big. He really has a lot of moments with Knives, especially early on, like the Dance Dance Revolution scene. And at the end of the film, of course, they defeat Gideon together.
Yes.
And Ramona is not part of that fight. She's just watching. And they use their Dance Dance Revolution moves to take him down.
Yeah.
And then in the original filmed ending, Scott ends up with Knives, which I think makes sense as part of his arc. And the film's been building up to it.
Yeah.
But now, when the film was in production, Volume 6 was not out yet.
Okay.
And O'Malley shared his notes with Edgar Wright. And Edgar Wright wrote this film with a lot of input from O'Malley, apparently. And they decided, they decided that was how the film was going to end. That it was going to end with Knives and Scott getting together.
Yeah.
And O'Malley was not super happy with it because the way he envisioned the story ending was with Scott ending up with Ramona. And apparently they tested it with audiences. And audiences also, apparently they were a bit split. Some wanted Scott to end up with Ramona, and some wanted Scott to end up with Knives. Then Volume 6 came out with the ending where Scott ends up with Ramona, and they decided to go back and reshoot it.
Okay, well, that reshoot, you're literally like 30 seconds from the end of the movie, and suddenly I was like, oh, Scott ends up with Knives? Okay, I didn't remember that. And then she says to him, chase after you, fought for her all this time? You fought all those exes?
No, he didn't fight for her. That was... When he's in the fight with Gideon, he literally says... It's bizarre. It's bizarre, Kumar. Because when he dies, but he has his one-up, he dies. In the first battle, he fights for Ramona and is defeated by Gideon.
Yeah.
Then he dies and realizes that he needs self-respect, essentially. Yeah. He needs to do things for himself and grow up and be less... Stop pursuing fantasies and so on, and being a moocher, etc., etc. And then he's able to defeat Gideon because he says, Gideon says, are you going to fight me for her? Pointing to Ramona. Yeah. He goes, no, I'm going to fight you for me. And then he gets the sword comes out of his chest.
Yeah.
And it says, Scott gained the power of self-respect. And the sword has +4 balls.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Or maybe +8. But then in the last 30 seconds, as you say, Knives says, but you fought for her, go get her. It's like, no.
And then suddenly we get this 30-second scene. They walk into one of the portals into subspace. You see the CN Tower, end of movie.
Yeah.
And it feels like, whoa, you suddenly swapped in the last, 15 seconds.
Yeah.
It feels weird.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I completely agree with you, Kumar, and I think he should have got... I mean, ever since I first saw it, I've always thought he should have ended up with Knives. Because, that's the way the film was pointing towards that, I think, all the way through.
Yeah.
And they've just tacked on this different ending because...
And Ramona gives him this speech at the end where, I need to go off and do this or whatever, and it seems like, oh, that's it. She needs her space.
Yeah,
leave her alone.
That's right. But... but O'Malley, Edgar Wright, and a lot of the cast are on record as liking the Ramona Scott ending a lot more. Fine.
I like Ramona and Scott more than Scott and Knives, but I don't think, as you said, I don't think the movie is built to that.
No.
But that is the better choice of what the end point you want to get to, I think.
Sure. I think, yeah, but perhaps. But I definitely think as a film it would have worked better if he ended up with Knives.
I think she's...
That they just do their growing up together, and Ramona also does her growing up alone, away from toxic men.
unless you read it as she's representing his past and being childish, and Ramona is the future and growing up.
For sure, and O'Malley felt that Scott ending up with Knives was denying Knives agency. It was reinforcing her obsession with Scott as something that she needed to give up. These are all valid points.
Yeah.
I have my own personal opinion, but these are all valid points.
Did you notice when he walks into the final fight, somebody in the crowd says the comic book was better than the movie? And I feel like we've had that in one of the other movies we covered. I can't remember which one, where somebody actually says out loud the comic was better than the movie.
I don't know, but I read somewhere online that line was not scripted, and that person yelled it out because O'Malley was on set that day.
Okay. And I do like in the final when he beats Gideon and there's 7 million coins, we get a close up and they're all loonies and toonies. I thought that was a nice little touch there. Yeah, so much like the comic, it does not let up. No. It's non-stop.
Unlike the comic, it only takes an hour and 50 minutes to get through.
Yes. And also, unlike the comic, Edgar Wright was born in 1974.
Oh, yeah.
With the same year I was born. And I wonder if that makes a difference.
Perhaps. Well, I've written down, I think this film is a triumph of style over substance. Now, normally that's not praise, but I think this film is stylish.
It really is.
Style incarnate.
Yes.
And part of the reason why it succeeds so well, I think, is because it's stripped out a lot of that maudlin, obsessive message material that's present in the comic, that's endlessly present in the comic, where people are agonizing about the past. We have endless scenes of Scott worrying about getting a job or worrying about envy and thinking about how the breakup occurred with envy, and flashbacks occurring synonymously with what's occurring in the present.
See, I don't see those as messages, I see those as subplots.
Yes, but those subplots are in service of this. I don't think they stand on their own. I think they're tedious. They're there because it's about, look, kid, what you're feeling is valid.
Yeah.
Mr. 17-year-old. Again, this sounds elitist, but that's what I feel when I read those subplots. They don't seem like they're in service of anything except this... What could broadly be considered this story about relationships.
Yeah.
What is a good relationship? What is a bad relationship?
Yeah.
What is a mature relationship? What is an immature relationship?
You know what? I think the problem is the comic turns into a sitcom in the middle. Where it's just like more episodes. Here's the one where Scott moves out. Here's the one where Scott meets his brother again. His brother was...
Yeah, his brother shows up for like 5 pages.
Yeah.
His parents buy him a flat. His parents were rich all along. The film just admits all this to great effect.
Yeah.
To great effect. We don't need to know about Scott's parents. We don't need to know about Scott's brother. Scott's sister doesn't need to do anything except...
I think it's gone into sitcom world where it's just like, here's your episode for the week or whatever.
And we should talk a little bit about, since I mentioned the word style, we should talk about the style, we should talk about the aesthetic.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a little bit. This film's fantastic visual experience. And it never... there's always something happening. Visually, it's so great. It draws very heavily on video game aesthetic, on particularly like 8-bit.
Yeah. Yeah, right from the Universal logo.
Yeah.
The opening, the first thing you see, yeah.
It's all very much,
it's like
Legend of Zelda, chiptunes. Spinning hearts. The one-up with Scott's face looks like a one-up from a Nintendo, a Famicom game from, like the 1980s. It's so pretty. There's always something going on, but it never feels too intrusive.
Yeah.
It feels like maybe a little bit like, say, watching a music video.
But I think it's more than just that aesthetic level. I think it's the movement of the actors.
Yeah.
Like I said, the way Matthew Patel dances and Michael Cera's martial arts.
That's brilliant.
And it's so...
The actors are always front and center. I think that's what makes it different from Speed Racer. See, I was thinking, why did I hate Speed Racer's aesthetic so much? And why do I like Scott Pilgrim's one so much? Because on the surface, they're kind of similar. Garish, frenetic, colourful, but... And a mixed bag, in the sense that one of my criticisms of Speed Racer was that it didn't seem to have a core aesthetic. It just seemed to be just throwing random stuff in.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to have a consistent vision for what the Speed Racer world should look like. That's also somewhat true of the Scott Pilgrim film, because although it draws really heavily on the video game aesthetic, there's always lots of other stuff going on, like the comic sensibility. The inside of Scott's head is an old tiny dial at one point.
Yeah.
I think...
But there's no... In Speed Racer, you'd never get something like Scott's apartment. You'd never get something that tactile and grimy and real, and those Toronto streets and all that kind of stuff, and the clubs, the nightclub, the place where they're playing, all that kind of stuff would not be in Speed Racer.
I think, I really
it's almost like there's an overlay on the real world in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I really think you're onto something there. Because the
actors... It's not trying to create the whole world, it's something planted on top of it.
The actors are front and centre, aren't they? And the location, it's so grounded in Toronto, and yet, as you say, there's this superimposed fable on top of it. Fable world. Like, what you said about V for Vendetta, the comic, part of making it easier to accept some of its more credulity-straining moments was to imagine it as a fable. I think you can take that approach with Scott Pilgrim. Even though it has these it has real people front and centre, and it's set in Toronto, which is very much a real place, it feels like a fantasy story.
Yes.
It feels like we're seeing another world through the lens of downtown Toronto, almost.
Yes.
And I think perhaps it's that core, that grounding core, that makes all of that other stuff so acceptable without ever getting dragged away into a world where you start thinking, why does this visual look different from this visual? Because that's how I feel. I think that's why I like this film and not Speed Racer.
Right.
I think we have a coherent theory as to why one is superior to the other there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kumar.
Yeah. Okay, you want to go into your trivia or production facts?
Yeah, so I have heaps.
Okay.
As I said, I wrote down this. I've written nerd power! ! So obviously there's a lot of nerd royalty in this film, comic book royalty, etc., etc. Chris Evans.
This movie's so well cast, by the way. They look so much like they look in the comics.
Yeah.
Like they found the right people.
The casting in this is genius.
And I almost thought, as I was remembering, like as rereading the comic out, and I looked at that very Junko Mizuno looking drawing of Envy Adams, I was like, Brie Larson's not right for this. And I watched the movie, it's like, oh yeah, she did it with her pouting.
Yeah.
That's how she got it.
And the hair.
Yeah.
You're right. With the possible exception, Brandon Routh looks so much like Todd.
Yeah.
Like Todd is like 5 lines.
Yeah.
And plus hair, right?
Yeah.
But he looks so much like him.
Yes.
It's
and that's part of why I think this is really reverential towards the comic.
Yes.
Is they're like, we're not going to cast somebody that looks totally wrong for the part because their name or whatever. They're like, we got to find somebody that looks the part, or make sure they've got the right facial hair, make sure they're done with the right clothing and makeup and stuff. Yeah.
It's great. I agree. And that's why this film doesn't succeed because it's abandoning the comic. There are parts of it has abandoned, like the murky subplots and the endless twists and turns that I don't care, melodramatic sitcom-esque stuff that I don't care about. But it's still very true to the comic visually, and nowhere more so than the great casting.
Yeah.
Alright, let's talk about it. It's Chris Evans, edging towards comic book movie all-stardom. Yep. He has now been in 2 films that we've reviewed.
Yep.
This one and Snowpiercer. There was another actor that was in Snowpiercer and also appeared in this film.
Who's that?
Alison Pill, who plays Kim.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I never even put that together.
That brings her up to 2 appearances as well. She also plays Agnes Jurati in Picard, which is a travesty of a TV show. But moving on...
Oh my god, I never even recognized her. I never put that together. Okay.
Because she looks so great as Kim. She looks just like Kim
Yeah.
from the comic.
Yeah.
I
There's
think-
even a funny line about the freckles where he says she used to have freckles and she still
And she's
has the
still
freckles.
very freckled, yeah. And the shirt, the top she's wearing looks exactly like the top. The hair looks exactly like the hair. It's fantastic. She just vanishes into the character of Kim.
Yeah, wow.
Brandon Routh obviously is Todd, who played Superman and the Atom. Ramona
And
Flowers,
Dylan Dog.
Right. Ramona Flowers is played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead,
Yeah.
who was in Sky High, a superhero movie.
Okay.
On our cheat list, I believe. She was in The Thing, Monster Island,
Okay.
and she played the Huntress in Birds of Prey.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, that one counts.
Well, we're never going to do it because
No.
it's DCU,
TV show.
but it's...
Oh, you mean the movie, not the TV series?
I'm not sure. I think it was the movie.
Okay.
I think it was the movie with Margot Robbie.
Yeah. Okay.
She's also in Ashoka, the TV series.
Okay.
But I don't care about that. Jason Schwartzman, who plays Gideon, he was in Enter the Spider-Verse
Ah.
as the Spot.
Okay.
The villain, he can make spots.
Okay. I don't
In the second
remember him.
film. Brie Larson, obviously.
Yes.
We've mentioned her. Very young Brie Larson. She's gone on to play Captain Marvel and win an Oscar for her role in The Room.
Yep.
Or Room.
Uh,
Or was she just
is it
nominated?
The Room or Room?
Room. The Room is a completely different
Yes.
film.
Okay. I can never remember what this is.
Matthew Patel plays the character Matthew Patel is played by Satya Bhabha.
Okay.
I believe Matthew Patel is supposed to be Indo-Canadian, so there's a special resonance there, since
Yeah.
one other person in this room is
Yeah.
Indo-Canadian. Although his actor is British, but lives in the US.
Okay.
And of course Thomas Jane,
Yeah.
who never wears shoes apparently.
Right.
And I was watching, you don't see his feet.
His first movie was a Telugu language movie, and I don't know how that happened. I want to know what the story... He was a lead in a Telugu movie, and I want to know how this happened.
Wow.
In like 1988 or
We
something.
will find that out when we do The Punisher.
Yes. Or what was the other one I said he was in? Oh, The Crow, City of
Right,
Angels.
well, we're probably going to do The Punisher first. Alright, how did this get made? Okay, so like Kick-Ass and some other films that we've done, this was in production very early. So Oni Comics started shopping around for producers and studios as soon as Volume 1 was done. In
Okay.
fact, maybe before Volume 1 even went to press. So maybe...
That's a lot of faith in a cartoonist who'd only put out one volume before.
I agree, but it seems to be a fact. Edgar Wright signed on before it was published.
Before Volume 1 was published.
Yes, he was given a pre-release copy when he was
Whoa.
doing promotion, when he was promoting Shaun of the Dead. He was given a pre-release copy.
Wow.
And he said, I want to direct this movie.
Okay.
He co-wrote the film, as I said, and O'Malley himself was heavily involved, and he also wanted Michael Cera from the very start. Although Cera was only 16 years old when he first signed on.
Well, they aged him to 22. In the comic, he's 23, and in this, he's 22. And I was wondering if they just felt the gap between 22 and 17 was too much, or was he actually 22? Or...
He was 20 years old,
Oh, wow.
which made him younger than almost all of his co-stars.
Wowie zowie, okay.
So, Knives, who is 17 years old in the film, is played by Ellen Wong, Canadian actor, who's 25.
Okay. She's really good in this.
She's fantastic in it. So she was 5 years older than her
Yeah, right.
older boyfriend.
Well, that's actually... There's a joke in the comic, throughout the comic, where his sister calls him Kid Bro all the time, or... What was it? The sister
Even
is...
though he's older than
He's
her.
older than her, but she keeps calling him my kid brother. Yeah.
In the actors that played his younger sister and young Neil were both older than
Yeah,
him
okay.
as well. Yes. I've already discussed how the ending was supposed to feature Scott getting together with Knives. There were some other things that were supposed to happen in the ending that didn't occur. Gideon was supposed to turn into a giant mecha.
Whoa, okay.
And there was also an ending that's been teased at by Edgar Wright where he was supposed to turn out to be a serial killer that fantasized all the video game elements.
Okay,
And it
weird.
just straight up murdered. Although, this is allegedly a joke.
Okay.
Let's talk about the music.
Okay.
So, all the members of Sex Bob-omb learned to play their respective instruments,
Okay.
with the exception of Michael Cera, who already played bass, and in fact, had to learn how to play worse.
Oh, right.
Because he needed to look like a convincing loser.
I'm more interested if that little girl in that band, what was it called, Josh and those guys or something, whatever that band was.
Clash and the Boys. Is
No,
that
it was
little...
Clash at, it was the Clash at Demon Head. Was
No, no.
was Envy Adams' band, but there was the other band called Something and Those Guys.
And the Boys.
And the Boys.
Is it not?
And the drummer was this little girl.
Yeah, and then Wallace calls out, "Is that little girl a boy too?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Yes."
And
she
I
flips him
wondered
off.
if she learned to play the drums, actually.
I don't know.
Okay.
Perhaps. All of the band names in this, in the comic and the film, are inspired by video games.
Yes.
NES video games.
And I will mention also, in many scenes, Scott is wearing a shirt that says Plumtree on it, which was the name of a indie Toronto band that had a song called Scott Pilgrim, which is where the comic got its name from.
Indeed.
And it was apparently based on a real guy.
They've since broken up, Plumtree, but they got back together for the premiere of this film.
Oh, okay.
Beck wrote all of Sex Bob-omb's music.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
No, he apparently in 2 days.
I believe that.
And lots of Toronto-based bands contributed music to the film, including a band called Metric, Broken Social Scene, Cornelius, Dan the Automator, Kid Koala, and David Campbell.
Don't know any of these. But I will say that the Tragically Hip is mentioned in the comic, and Ramona is grossed out by it, but they are not mentioned at all in the movie, which is a bit of a slight bummer. But anyway.
One final note, perhaps maybe this, do you know the band Sloan?
Yes, I know.
Well, Chris Murphy of the band Sloan was the guitar coach for the actors in the film. So this film was a flop. A big flop, actually.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Its budget, after tax deductions, was $60 million.
Okay.
Its box office take, $49.3 million.
Whoa.
Its actual budget was closer to $90 million, but it got back about $30 million in rebates from filming in Canada, I suppose.
Yeah.
So this was a flop, despite being critically quite well received, and having since become a cult hit and doing quite well on home media. It's since made back its budget on home media, but it was not a success in theatres.
I'm surprised that the anime version exists.
It's because it's since become a cult classic.
Yeah.
And at the 10th anniversary in 2020, there was a lot of buzz about a re-release in cinemas that unfortunately didn't happen because of COVID-19.
Oh, right, okay.
But the soundtrack was re-released in 2021.
Okay.
And they've since, I think the actors have since got together for table reads and so on for charity and things like that. And of course now we're getting the anime or the animated series re-release with all the same actors coming back and reprising their roles. But to return to the fact that this was a box office bob-omb, as one article that I found put it, 5 reasons why Scott Pilgrim vs. the World failed to find an audience. Now, a lot of people blame the marketing, like how do you market this film? Yeah. But apparently, Universal there was quite a lot of money spent on marketing this movie. At the Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con in 2010, I think, when it was very heavily promoted. There were a lot of ads. I remember the ads for it and thinking, I'd like to see that film, although I didn't. I was one of the many people that didn't. So marketing perhaps not to blame. So this guy, who wrote this article, says the marketing is not to blame. He comes up with 5 reasons why he thinks it didn't do well. Okay. So the first reason, people over 30 don't get it. Which is, we've sort of been hinting.
I don't think that's true. I very much enjoyed this movie.
Of course. But remember, you've seen it, and you'd read the comic.
Yeah, but I saw it when I was 30.
Yeah, but you'd read the comic. You're part of the locked-in audience because you know the comic. Right. So he says, people over 30 don't get it. He says, look at this movie on the surface, if you're a prospective viewer. My wife liked it. Of course. If anyone who watches it likes it, but why didn't people go see it?
Okay, right. Yeah, to get your foot in the door,
Yeah, because it seems like it's about 20-something douchebags.
Yes, right.
And it also looks like a kid's film.
Yeah, that's true too, yeah.
So people have 30 are like, well, I'm not going to bother with this. Then there was a second reasoning. People under 30 don't get it.
Yeah.
And this is that a lot of the references specifically geared at millennials. Yeah. Right? Because although it's filled with a lot of what we might call, nerd humor, video game humor, a lot of it's quite old, dated.
8-bit.
Yeah, so it's like, you got to know what an Atari is.
Yes.
You have to have played Legend of Zelda on NES. Yeah. There's even a Seinfeld sketch in the middle.
Yes, that's amazing, yeah.
Of course, we find it hilarious because we were, alive in the 90s.
Yeah.
But some of the audience for this film weren't.
Right.
Or were children. So people under 30 don't get it. That's a problem. Next up, geeks don't get it. Okay, now what does this mean? The author says he doesn't think it's a geek film, despite it being based on a comic. He says this is a hipster movie.
I think this is a writer writing words.
Of course it is. But here's the quote. This is a movie about a slacker musician whose biggest problem is choosing which of the two hot girls he's dating he most wants to sleep with.
That's true. Sort of.
He says, what if a geek... So this is when the Marvel juggernaut's only just barely lifting off. So arguably, nerd culture hasn't gone as mainstream as it has now. He says, what are odds are that a geek simply doesn't get the appeal of a movie that seems to be about cool guys with guitars who only play vintage video games. He says at this point in time, Hollywood was still mixing up hipsters and geeks.
Right, okay.
It's a possibility. Point 4, people hate Michael Cera.
Not true.
Maybe it was true in 2010. He says at this point, hipsters were becoming what he terms a despised demographic. And Michael Cera was absolutely the poster boy for hipsters at this point in time. And also people were getting a bit tired of him playing the same character. He seems to play the same character over and over at this point in his career, right? In Juno, in Year One, in a few
Arrested Development.
Yeah, absolutely Arrested Development. And you know what? People didn't want to see another Michael Cera film where he plays the same kind of bumbling, twee, kind of well-dressed person. But as tentative evidence of this theory, Michael Cera has not played the lead, arguably, in a film since.
Well, I don't think he was ever... Was he ever a leading man? I think this was...
He absolutely
outside.
did. I mean, I checked his filmography. I didn't write down the names of the films, but he was absolutely the lead in several films in 2007, 2008, 2009.
They like really indie, underground kind of films. I don't think they were big Hollywood productions. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, well, he was the lead in those films. He's only really been in ensemble films since. Okay, now, the final point. Scott Pilgrim is a musical without songs. Writers writing words, Kumar. This guy thinks that Wright applied the musical format to... But instead of having musicals, it has fight scenes. So do you remember how we said Popeye was a... One reviewer said that Popeye was an anti-musical.
Yeah.
This reviewer, thinks that...
It's a stealth musical?
He thinks it's... Well, yeah, perhaps a stealth musical or a fight-sicle.
Yeah.
Here's what he says. In a musical, characters break into song and dance whenever there's something too big to be expressed by words.
Okay.
In a musical, you learn about each character's personality through what he sings. Sometimes the songs even move the plot along, or help to change someone's perspective. Scott Pilgrim uses its fights in the same way. Scott Pilgrim seems to have a fight whenever there's something too big to express with dialogue, or something too important to simply say. It's through these elaborate, colourful fights that Scott's personality changes and grows. It's because of his fights that he eventually realises he lacks self-respect, and when he gets some, that's part of the fight too. Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's a musical, that means it's a martial arts movie.
Yeah. Yes. And the reviewer's point here is that he thinks that this musical aesthetic bleeds through into the trailers and kept away people that don't like musicals. I think this is drawing a very, very long bow.
Yeah, I would definitely call that martial arts aesthetic.
This is martial arts trope that it's through a fight that the character... So the thing is, he does have a point. Scott does... His personality does change as a consequence of each of the fights that he happens in. The plot always moves on after one of the fights. Either Ramona leaves, he moves on to the next stage of his relationship with her. There is a point to it. It doesn't make it a musical, though. So, to sum up about this melange, which apparently alienated people and kept them away from screenings. Hipsters aren't geeks, and geeks aren't rock musicians, and rock musicians aren't old-school gamers, and aging gamers don't like musicals. In a perfect world, none of that would matter, and people would simply show up to the theatre and be blown away by the innovative level of creativity on display in Scott Pilgrim, like we were, but you have to get them there first.
I think he's almost described the comic in a way, as it has everything going on. Yeah. Okay.
Alright, let's do our votes.
Okay, comic. I'm gonna say yay. It's not for me. I've read it 3 times, but it's... I can totally get why people would like it. So I would not say nay to it. I think it's made just for younger people that are younger than I.
For me, it's nay, for all the reasons that I've made excruciatingly clear throughout the rest of the podcast.
Okay.
It's turgid, it's dull, it's funny, but I'm never reading it again.
I don't think it was turgid and dull. I think it was funny. I did think it was funny the whole way through.
It just becomes a morass after a while, and I couldn't tell one scene from another. They all started to blur together.
Yeah, it's too long. That's for sure.
And I just have zero I never really had any interest in reading it anyway, and now that I have read it, I have no interest in reading it again.
Okay, the movie...
1,000 times
yeah. Yeah, okay. Adaptation?
Now, look, I think this is a really, really good adaptation in a number of ways. It succeeds on several levels as an adaptation, in my opinion. So, the aesthetic. As you pointed out, the comic has a much more manga-esque sensibility. The film moves away from that and leans into the video game element, which was present in the comic, but ramps it up because it is so much better suited for the visual medium.
Yeah.
Also, it's an improvement. Some of the gags are enormously improved through some of the techniques that film can bring to it. You know, it's like the fast cuts.
Yeah.
Like the hat gag.
Yeah. I'm going to say they're alternate gags.
Sure.
I'm not going to say they're improved, although I did say that he punched up the dialogue in places. I'm going to say they're alternates, like the Amazon.ca gag, which I think is funny in both, maybe a bit better in the comic because of the way the panels are paced.
I, on the other hand, think it's better in the film. I mean, he did a really good job in the comic. But I love the zoom, the close-up shots of his brow creased in consternation. We see a close-up of his eyes, we see close-ups of the word as he's reading them. The music swells to indicate something dramatic.
That's the email, that's not the Amazon.ca bit, right?
Oh, right, sorry, yeah, sorry. It's the same scene.
Yeah.
Alright, sorry, okay, sure. You're right, actually. That Amazon.ca gag is really good in the comic. But in that same scene, there's the bit with the email, which I think is perfect in the movie.
Yes.
And in the comic, he kind of has to lay it on a little thick that Scott's a moron and is not paying attention to what's happening. I think the film is full of stuff like this, and also, as you say, alternate gags, so standalone gags which didn't exist in the comic but have been written specifically for the film, but still have very tied in with the whole theme of the movie, the whole feel, the comic sense of the film. Adaptation is simplification. I love that they stripped out all that stuff I don't care about.
Yeah, well, that's, necessary as well when you're going down to 2 hours.
Yeah.
But as I said, this is like a Russian novel in terms of the amount of stuff that happens in it and subplots.
And yet it doesn't have the complexity of a Russian novel. It just has the substance of a Russian novel.
Of course.
Well, how could it? A Russian novel obviously is... That's not a fair comparison. But I feel like this film has... The message is still there, but it's much more understated. It doesn't matter if you don't come to grips with the idea that Scott needs self-respect and needs to grow up. The film is still excellent.
You know what, I think the message that you have to overcome your ex's memory, or sorry, your partner's memory of their exes is not in the movie at all.
No, it's more just about self-respect, isn't it?
In the comic, you really kind of get a sense that he's trying to get at something about...
emotional baggage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's...
And the
movie is just like, you gotta fight these dudes. And so
you gotta fight you have to fight for you and not pursue... You have to do things for you and not in pursuit.
Yeah, but even as he's going through the fights, in the comic, when he's going through the fights, you're like, okay, is this some kind of metaphor about baggage? And in the movie, you're never like, is this a metaphor? It's just like some awesome stuff happening on screen. And
that's why I like it. There's a hint, there's a smidgen, a slice of this almost... like deepity philosophical moralizing and so on that's present in the comic, but only a little bit of it makes in the film, and I think that's a massive improvement because you can take it or leave it.
Yeah, I think you can take it or leave it in the comic.
No,
as well.
I can't agree. I don't agree at all. I think that's really what the comic's about. And it's rammed into us over and over through these boring subplots.
Yeah, but it doesn't add up in the comic. That's why I'm saying you can leave it aside, because it doesn't... But
then what's the comic about?
That's what I'm saying, is what's the movie about? It's not about anything.
It's about fighting seven dudes
awesome stuff that happens.
And realising at the end all you really needed was to believe in yourself. This is a very typical kind of film plot.
Yeah, and I think the comic is just about like awesome stuff that happens and funny jokes as well.
It's too long and it labours the point too much. I don't agree. Sorry, Kumar. And finally... this is great. Also, even though, as you say, it's more video game than comic book, I still think there's a lot of great comic book visuals make it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
The panel shots,
Yep.
The text, the pop-up text, the captions.
Yep.
You couldn't mistake it for anything but a film that had a strong comic book sensibility about it, I think. Even though it owes more to video games, I've also seen it described as a superhero movie.
Okay.
What do you think? Does this follow the kind of superhero kind of hero's journey?
No, he doesn't get any powers or anything.
Of course he has powers. He has them.
He has them from the start.
Yeah.
He fights Matthew Patel right off the bat. It's not like he... Yeah, I don't know.
Some of them do have powers from the start. I mean, not every superhero starts with no powers.
I guess, yeah, that's true.
It's more about the journey of self-discovery, right?
Yeah, okay.
And the defeating of powerful foes.
I'll buy that then, yeah.
I think there's some strength in that. I think you wouldn't mistake this for you would file this as comic book film.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned back when we did Danger Diabolik, Edgar Wright is on record as saying that the film that had the most influence on Scott Pilgrim was Mario Bava's Danger Diabolik.
Oh, okay, right.
He actually said that.
Yeah.
Which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, it's a ringing.
Yeah.
yay
Oh, yeah, it's
as
a great
an
adaptation. Absolutely. It's, like I said, it's any book that gets pared down to a 2-hour movie. It is absolutely, and it does it right. It does it absolutely
I think so
right.
too. I agree.
And as I said, it's totally respectful to the book in every way, and tries to bring in all those visuals.
Yes.
And all the dialogue. It's not like a lot of other adaptations where like, this comic is stupid, how can I make this good?
And I think, as we said when we talked about Tomb of Dracula, a kind of like proof that your adaptation was successful. Oh, and we also... Oh, no, it was Blade that we mentioned. Yeah. Blade and Tomb of Dracula. Proof that your adaptation was successful is when elements of the adaptation get adapted back into the core medium, as this film was being written by Edgar Wright.
Yeah, right.
With his co-writer, whose name I forget, with O'Malley's input. Some of the stuff they came up with made it back into the volumes as they were being published by O'Malley and Oni Press.
Right. Okay.
Which I think says it all, really.
Okay. So please like, subscribe, rate, review.
Yes.
Join us on Facebook. Please look at our Patreon page.
Please.
I haven't. And next week we're going to do Shortcomings, which just came out this year. The comics by Adrian Tomine from many, many years ago. And that's probably all we need to say about it. I just wanted to hit it before the year is out, because it would be a chance to actually do something that's
come out this
pretty
year.
fresh. And it was at the film festival here. I thought it was going to get a wide release and we'd get to see it in the cinema. This happened twice this year. I thought we'd get to see a movie as it was coming out, and it didn't happen. In Australia, it only played at MIF. And so we didn't get to see it.
Well, I can't
so
wait to talk about it.
Yeah.